I'm going to speak mainly tonight about our work on campaigning on the climate and in the Scottish elections in the run-up to COP26 next year. But before I begin, I just wanted to give a quick overview of what we do at SCIAF. I know that many of you will already be aware of us, but maybe some of you are not quite as well aware. So I just wanted to quickly go over what we do. And so we are the official international aid agency of the Catholic Church in Scotland. And we currently work with 131 projects around the world, and we help families in many different ways. So the spade icon here represents the work we do on food, and we train up farmers to help them free themselves from hunger and to have a little bit more to sell at markets as well. The book icon represents our work on education, and that's for all the projects we do which help train people up and give them new skills like in tailoring and dressmaking to make extra income. The dove icon represents our work on peace and justice and the projects which are focusing on helping people stand up for their human rights. And finally, the cross icon is for the emergency work we do, our emergency response in places around the world which have been affected by disasters, and increasingly that is climate-related disasters. So we're part of the Worldwide Caritas Network, which is the network of Catholic development organisations in over 200 countries and territories around the world. And so when we do respond to emergencies, we do so through that Caritas network. And I think the last one where SCIAF provided on the ground assistance was the terrible explosion in Beirut, and we provided assistance through the Caritas Lebanon partner who are based on the ground there. So in the last year, we helped directly over 400,000 people. And so by directly, I mean farmers who are involved in projects or people who have been skilled up through training workshops. And that had a benefit on over 1,800,000 people. And that's because the rest of the family feels the impact of that increased income and resources that we help people build. And you'll see some stats there on the impact we've had on different projects as well. And of course, SCIAF is, everything we do is rooted in Catholic social teaching. And our whole ethos is about giving people a hand up, not a handout. Catholic social teaching focuses on meeting the needs of the whole person, going beyond just providing the basic needs that people need for nourishment. We also recognise that there's a spiritual and emotional well-being aspect of cultural community life, and we call this approach integral human development. Now, obviously, you'll see here the different pillars of Catholic social teaching, and for everyone at Eco Congregation Scotland, of course, stewardship of creation is so important to your mission. But the work that Pope Francis has done, I think, in recent years has really shown how all of these issues are connected. We know that climate change is killing the poorest first. We know that climate change is causing more war and conflict, and it will increasingly do so in the future as well. And we know that it's the greed and overconsumption in rich countries which is driving climate change. So all these things are connected, and we see it as part of our mission to make sure that all of these strands are covered in all of our work. And here in Scotland, we put pressure on both of our governments to change the political and social systems which keep people in poverty and also are destroying the planet. Earlier this year, just after the pandemic, over 90 organisations signed a letter to the First Minister calling for a just and green recovery. That letter included not only SCIAF but Eco Congregation Scotland and lots of other Christian groups in Scotland, including the Episcopal Church and the Faith Impact Forum of the Church of Scotland. It was a really broad and diverse coalition, but everyone was united with the common goal of making sure that we didn't see a repeat of the same mistakes that were made after previous crises where inequality and the climate crisis worsened. So we wrote to the First Minister at the beginning of the summer, and we met with government ministers and officials throughout the summer. I think at the early stages of the pandemic, the Scottish Government they were talking about a revolution in economic thinking, but as time has went on, that kind of more radical rhetoric has faded away, and it does it's beginning to sound a bit more like business as usual at the moment. So last month, in order to pick up the pressure again, we organised a virtual lobby where we encouraged people to meet with their local MSPs online. And over 400 people signed up, including a lot of people from the church. I recognise a lot of names from SCIAF and the Congregation Scotland that took part in that, which was great. And we managed to reach, I think, over a quarter of all MSPs, including 6 cabinet secretaries and ministers and 2 party leaders. So it had quite a good reach, and we know how important that direct communication is between elected representatives and their constituents, because we need to let them know that we don't want to go back to normal because normal wasn't good enough. And I think that's going to get more important as well as we go into next year. The beginning of next year is when the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is expected to deliver the UK budget, which should result in more money coming to Scotland through the Barnett consequentials. I think this could be a good opportunity for MSPs to invest in green jobs and climate justice, and we really need to make sure that they are pushed to do that. So we're looking to arrange a strategy session in the new year to come up with some ideas about how we keep the just and green recovery on the agenda of politicians. And of course, a representative from Congregation Scotland is more than welcome to join us for that as well. Next year is also the election year in Scotland, and the new group of MSPs are going to be elected to serve in what is a completely changed world. The pandemic has redefined what is politically possible. We saw how quickly governments could swing into action when the pandemic hit, and we need to see that the same scale of response when it comes to the climate emergency as well. Some of you might have seen in October, I think it was, Pope Francis published his 3rd encyclical. It's called Fratelli Tutti, and it was a call for fraternity between all brothers and sisters in the world. In that letter, he also called for a better kind of politics. It was a very political document, and he says that in order to achieve that better kind of politics, we need to have Christians engaging in politics, not just at the superficial level. Voting is extremely important, but we also need to have a Christian voice in the political debate around the kind of world we want to see as well. And that's why SCIAF will publish its own manifesto in the run-up to the elections, and we will be encouraging supporters to get in touch with the local candidates to ask them questions and write into their local newspapers to make sure that we can help shape the election debate next year. The manifesto is going to be called Rebuilding Our Common Home, and the main points we're looking to see are, first of all, we'll be asking the next government to transform Scotland to meet our target of a 75% cut in emissions by 2030. Thanks to campaigners, and I'm sure many of you guys were involved in this, the current Scottish Parliament has some of the most ambitious targets in the world for cutting emissions by 2030. But the next Parliament will actually need to take the action to deliver those targets. There was a report from the Committee on Climate Change last week, which said that currently we're not on track to meet them. So the group of MSPs that we elect in May next year will be in place for 5 years, and if they don't start taking real transformative action from day one, then we're not going to be able to meet our targets. The second point is we want to see the Climate Justice Fund boosted. Climate change is already happening and it's killing the poorest first. Scotland has recognised that poorer countries are bearing the burden of the damage caused by drought and storms and climate-related disasters. Even though richer countries like ours bear more responsibility for causing the emissions in the first place. The fact that Scotland has a standalone climate justice fund is fantastic, but the budget has been frozen at £3 million for the last 4 years. So we want to see that increased to £10 million as a sign of Scotland's commitment to doing its fair share for climate justice. The third point of it will be we want the next Scottish Government to hear the voices of communities most affected by climate change. Giving financial support to the most affected communities is not enough on its own. We also need to make sure that their voices are at the heart of the decision-making process. And so we're looking to ask the next Parliament to create platforms for communities in the Global South to identify their own priorities for climate change, because that's going to be so important to hear from the front line in the run-up to COP26 next year. The fourth point is we want to see the next Parliament pass a Wellbeing and Sustainable Development Bill. So what that would do is it would make it a statutory requirement. It would enshrine in law a duty for every local authority or public body in Scotland, from the local council up to the government, to think about the short and long-term impact of their decisions. And that would be their decisions, the impact it would have both in Scotland and elsewhere. It would make sure that we contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals and our climate commitments, but also crucially not undermine any of those commitments as well. So basically every aspect of domestic policy would be judged against the impact it would have on the Global South. And the last main point of the manifesto is to maintain international development funding. We know that these are really tough times for everyone, but every crisis hits the poorest countries in the world first, and the coronavirus is no different. The UK government recently decided to slash its international development funding to 0.5% of GDP, which is an absolute disaster for the world's poorest. The government said that this is because of the cost of the pandemic, but we want the Scottish Government to keep its promises to the world's poorest and not to turn their back on them at a time when there's such great need. The Scottish Government has had its own international development programme for a number of years under successive governments, going back to Jack McConnell. So it's something which all parties in Scotland have been proud of, and we want to see that maintained. So some of you today may have seen that in the news earlier about the publication of the Scottish Government's climate change plan. There was a lot of really good stuff in there, including a commitment to cut car travel by 20%. But we were disappointed because there was no mention of advancing the goal of climate justice internationally. I think in the year when Glasgow is going to be welcomed, well, when Scotland will be welcoming the world to Glasgow for COP26, we need to show that Scotland is a good global neighbour, and we want to get these issues to the top of the agenda. That's why our manifesto will focus on international justice. So here you'll see there's a photo of my son down in front of the SEC. My son is the one on the left, by the way, not the one on the right, just in case this web camera is making me look older. But we went down there just to highlight the 1 year to go to COP. Did that last month, because obviously it's going to be a big year for Scotland, and the world is watching us and expecting the COP26 to be a turning point, because if it's not, then we know that the poorest are going to pay the price. And the Paris Agreement set the target of limiting global warming to 2 degrees, with a commitment to pursue efforts to limiting it to 1.5 degrees. And on Saturday, the UK hosted a climate ambition summit, which encouraged countries to put forward tougher plans to meet their targets and lift their targets even further as well. Many of them did, including the UK, which announced the end of investment in fossil fuel projects abroad, and also increasing its targets to cut emissions by 68% by 2030. But most campaigners believe that we're still a long way off and that we need to see real ambition. And so things might look bleak at the moment, but I think there is some hope. For example, the victory of Joe Biden means, of course, that the USA will re-enter the Paris Agreement after Trump pulled out of it. China recently announced plans to cut its carbon emissions by 60%. They announced plans to reach net zero by 2060, and that is a real game changer. So things are moving, and we're seeing some signs of progress. SCIAF will be doing it's best to influence negotiations inside the hall with our international partners. We're planning to hold fringe events and give a platform to countries most affected, and we'll be taking part in exhibitions and other events in the official COP space. But I also think that we need to be clear that whatever comes out of COP and whatever the contents of the Glasgow Agreement or the Glasgow Declaration or whatever they call it, and I really hope that declaration is a really positive one, because I want the name of my city to be associated with something good. But whatever is in it, I think that it's safe to say that it's not going to solve the problem of climate change once and for all. So there is a small risk that that we get everyone excited about COP and lead them up to the top of a hill, which would lead to kind of inevitable disappointment. So I'm trying to think of COP more as an opportunity rather than a one-off event. And I think that to build a real legacy from COP, we should use it as an opportunity to engage our communities in taking practical steps and practical action to live more sustainably. And that's obviously something which all of you at Eco Congregation Scotland have already been doing so much important work. Earlier in the year, we published our updated parish resource called Caring for a Common Home, and we want to work with you in the new year to encourage more Catholic parishes to sign up as eco parishes. So in the spring or summer, hopefully when COVID calms down, I'd like to see us encouraging parishes to hold outdoor events like litter picks and holding climate training sessions in the run up to COP. And I think it's also an opportunity to inspire action from church leaders too. We already have all the science and the data to convince us of the need for action. We have enough hard evidence at the moment, so I don't think that the science alone will make a difference. What we really need is to win people's hearts and minds too. So faith has a really important role to play in the next year.